We ready? Hi, this is David Jacobson with Positive Coaching Alliance, welcoming you to the latest in our series of Google Plus Hangouts. This is one on time management for student athletes. As you may know, Positive Coaching Alliance is a national nonprofit organization developing better athletes, better people through a positive character-building youth sports environment for all youth and high school athletes. In this Hangout, I'm joined by several recent graduates of NCAA schools and NCAA sports, and we're going to provide tips and techniques high school student athletes to use right away and then in their futures, whether as NCAA athletes or any other endeavors. I'm joined by Taylor Dodson, former Cal Berkeley water polo player, by Ryan O'Halloran, former UC Davis football player, and by Marty Reed, former UCLA softball player. At this time, I'm going to start with Taylor and ask for about a 1-minute encapsulation of some of the time management challenges you face, both in high school and in college, and how the adjustment was from high school to college in terms of time management. Taylor?
Hi, DJ. Thanks so much for that introduction. So in high school, I played water polo and competed for my high school swim team while also playing for a competitive club water polo team, and mixing all of those with a heavy high school course load was challenging. I think my biggest piece of advice I write everything down and making sure that I take the initiative and get things done as soon as possible, and that helped me transition into college where there's a lot more responsibility on you, and as a varsity athlete you have a heavy class load and heavy competition time and a lot of training hours, so taking the initiative was definitely a big help for me and helps that transition from high school sports to NCAA level.
Terrific, thanks. Ryan, what's your perspective, again, high school background and how it translated into what you're able to do in college?
Yeah, thanks, DJ. So in high school, I played 3 sports. I did football, basketball, and lacrosse, ultimately going on to play football at UC Davis. But the biggest thing I kind of took from my time in high school was utilizing your resources. I had a lot of great resources in high school with people trying to help you, and took school very seriously. In fact, UC Davis wouldn't even look at you unless you had a 3.0 or higher. That's one of their requirements. So made sure I took that very seriously, and then taking that into college, they have tons of resources at UC Davis for athletes and students as well, from tutors to academic advisors that really give you, the tools you need to make you successful.
Terrific. And lastly, Marty Reed, let's hear some about your background and transition from high school to college.
Thank you, DJ. So in high school, I was involved in a lot of different organizations and clubs. I played softball, volleyball, and I ran track for my school. And I also was on a club volleyball team and a travel softball team. I was involved with a lot of the clubs on campus. I started my own club, so I was always busy. And one of the biggest things that I had to adjust to when I went into college was I didn't have, my parents there to help me like they did when I was in high school, keep track of my schedule. So the biggest thing was learning how to prioritize my time and being clear on what my goals were and setting my priorities around those things. So coming up with a great system that I'll talk to you more about later during this call, but that was the biggest thing that I had to adjust and learn how to do when I entered college.
Well, that's terrific from all three of you, with specific nuggets of advice that we can already take from Taylor suggesting we write things down, and so on. So great stuff. I want to talk a little bit about the specific challenge of just college. So we're going to move this from what we're up against in high school to college. There's additional distractions in terms of being on your own. So not only not having your parents and maybe some of the support system that you've been used to all your life, but some other psychological impacts of freedom of choice. Nobody is breathing down your neck or supervising you in terms of your studies and your prioritization. So Marty, why don't we start with you in terms of maybe some of what shocked you or what you had to adjust to in that vein, and how did you ultimately do it?
So we had a pretty tight schedule at UCLA for softball, we'd wake up super early for weights. So no one's there to wake you up in the morning. You have to use some type of system of an alarm. I also wrote a lot of things down to keep my schedule intact, but there was also a lot of resources available for me. So even with a heavy practice schedule and a school schedule, we also had tutors and study hall that all the freshmen were required to use so we wouldn't fall behind in our grades. And also just being clear on what it was that I was setting out to do, and knowing that there was a time to play and a time to work, and knowing the difference between those times. So making sure I kept track on, when I needed to study, make sacrifices, not go out, and making sure that I was staying on top of the things that were more important at the time.
Great. Both you and Ryan, in some of your comments so far, have alluded to the resources available to student-athlete. So, Ryan, will you talk a little bit more about what those resources were, how you availed yourself of those resources, and was there any hesitation, say, to ask for help, or were you really encouraged and structurally by the program, the UC Davis football program, to make sure that you took advantage of those?
Yeah, so to answer your question, kind of yes and no to both of those. We had all these great resources, and part of them, for example, going to class, we had class checks and requirements to sit in the first 5 rows. So with the football team, if you weren't going to class, you were going to pay for it. So that structure and that kind of reinforcement to make sure you're attending all your classes and staying focused in those classes really helped me kind of stay on track. But then going into resources, for example, we had an academic advisor there that we were required to meet with once a year. And I mean, you can meet with them once a year and it's great, but if you're not utilizing her and meeting with her more than once a year, you're not going to get as much out of it as you could. And so being there kind of as a freshman in my first couple weeks, you kind of get culture shock as, I got to go to practice, I got to go do all this, but I don't really have to read. No one's forcing me to do my homework. And it's kind of prioritizing your situation and putting your athletics and your schoolwork kind of before maybe going out and having fun, and kind of creating those goals you set each week and each month that really allow you to utilize those resources.
Terrific. Taylor, will you talk a little bit about sort of the infrastructure as well at your school, how you took advantage of those resources, and any other ways in which parents, siblings, teammates, etc. may have helped you along?
Yeah, so actually the 3 of us going to UC schools and participating at our programs, I think we have a lot of similarities that I can relate to. Similar to what Marty was saying, freshman year we had to go to mandatory study hours, make sure we were on top of our grades, and then as years went on in college, those resources were made available. Meeting with our academic advisor, it was encouraged that we meet with her once a month, but not everyone did. And so I think that one thing that really helped along was a team culture that was established, typically by the older players, of going to study hours, even if you're not a freshman, it's another time to bond with your teammates, but it's also a good way to set a precedent of this is how our team culture is. We make sure that we study, we take advantage of this resource that not all students have, and making sure that your teammates are going to your academic advisors, making sure that they're ready for when it's time to schedule classes for the next semester. So those are ways that we did it. And then as I became an older player, trying to take on that responsibility with my teammates to make sure we included the underclassmen in those activities.
Fantastic. That's what we at PCA would call being a triple impact competitor, working to improve yourself, your teammates, and your sport as a whole. So glad to hear that you did that. So the last question that I have, one more round through all 3 of you, is one piece of advice. Maybe go back to your 16-year-old self. What would you have wanted to know as a high school student athlete that would have helped you immediately, and that would have translated into your time management skills in college? And let's start with you, Taylor.
Okay. I think I would have wanted to know my practice time a little bit further ahead of schedule. Sometimes things would happen where we'd be coming up on a semester and I anticipate a certain schedule time and think I know the classes I want to take, and then the pool time gets taken, or we have some other sort of inconvenience. So just making sure that I had kind of classes, several classes ready on the back burner to fit that worked with my schedule, to make sure that no matter when I had training, that I was still working towards my degree and making sure that I was getting the right classes that I needed to take.
Great piece of advice. So really kind of pay attention. Don't just feel like you can check a few boxes on your registration form and you're out of the woods.
Yeah, exactly.
And most students, may have to make some sorts of allowances for that, but certainly not the kind that a student athlete is going to need in terms of working around those time commitments. Really appreciate that, Taylor. Ryan?
Yeah, kind of going off Taylor, I would say planning ahead and setting goals. Something I really didn't do my first year or two at Davis, and kind of took it to heart my later 2 years. And by setting goals, I don't just mean being a 4.0 student or winning a championship that year, but setting smaller goals like, okay, I need to study for this class for 4 hours this week, and I need to go get this done before the end of the day. And just by setting those small goals and planning ahead, you can kind of prepare for what may come up and stuff that you didn't plan. So after practice one night you may be too tired, but if you make up for it by studying earlier in the week and getting that out of the way, it really does kind of prepare you for what's ahead.
So it sounds like there's some concern there about consistency, and that the student athlete should establish some consistent patterns in high school so that they carry over more easily into college, so that even if you have to make an adjustment, there's some level of consistency, and setting the intermediate goals will help with that. And presumably, those patterns of consistency then also translate to the playing field, where you're now a person with good habits all around. Took the words right out of your mouth, huh, Ryan?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was saying.
Okay, great. Glad I interpreted that. And Marty, let's hear from you. Close this out here with your answer to that question.
So I agree with everything that Ryan and Taylor just said, but to not be repetitive and to add on to it, I would say the importance of an accountability group. Surround yourself with people who are going to make you better at these types of things. You're going to have the resources and you're going to have a schedule that could help you be successful if you follow it and if you stick to it. So surround yourself with the people that are also, on that path, and being early to practice, staying after and actually following the system, and that's going to help you, stay on top of your work, on top of your studies, on top of your practice schedule and everything. So just making sure that you're growing with the people that you're surrounding yourself with as well.
That's more fantastic advice. I want to thank all three of you, Marty, Ryan, and Taylor, for your time on the Google Plus Hangout. Appreciate the audience who watched this, and encourage you to share it with your youth, middle school, high school student athletes, as they're always en route to developing into better athletes, better people through high school, hopefully through college, and regardless of when their athletic careers end, these are the sorts of life lessons that they can always take moving forward into any of their endeavors. Thank you very much.